Leopold's Waltz of the Dead. There was a young composer named Leopold Montgomery who resided in the lush landscape of Savannah, Georgia, during the mid-1800s. He lived on his family's estate, a blue-painted manor on a grassy knoll, surrounded by fields of tobacco. He was a struggling artist, toiling up in the attic on his compositions, hoping that he might write the next masterpiece. Long into the nights, he would burn the midnight oil, even to the point of his fingers starting to cramp and bleed. No matter how hard he tried, however, he just could not succeed. Piece after piece were rejected. He was practically shunned by the finest households in Savannah from ever playing his pieces at future balls, parties, and catered affairs. Thankfully for him, his family was rich, so he was able to press on. But he was becoming despondent, melancholic, and angry, and most of all, desperate. Until one night, however, during the winter of 1839, after hours and hours of working on his latest piece, he descended from his attic studio with a zest in his step, smiling and filled with a joy at what he had just done. He told his family that he had just composed his finest work yet, that he had finally accomplished what he set out to do, and that was to write the next classical masterpiece, and he called it the Waltz des Morts, the Waltz of the Dead. His family was skeptical, however, for they too, just as others in the community, knew that his music just wasn't very good. He begged and he pleaded for his parents to let him play it at their famous Christmas ball that was fast approaching. They were hesitant, to say the least, especially his mother. Their Christmas ball was known throughout the South as being one of the most lavish parties of the year. The who's who would be there. She did not want to be embarrassed. But that is exactly why Leopold persisted. For he knew some of the finest people in music would be there, and he needed to be heard. His mother finally relented, and he was allowed to perform at the upcoming ball on Christmas Eve. He waited and waited, and the night finally came. It is said he came out to the piano wearing a half-skeleton mask and dressed in black with purple trimmings. Witnesses report his parents to have stood in the corner of the ballroom with a look of nervousness festooned across their faces, and those in attendance condescendingly clapping, waiting for him to fail. He bowed to the crowd, then sat on the bench, flexing his fingers before placing them on the keys. He then whispered, "Now dance to my waltz of the dead." He began to play, and almost instantly the guests began to dance. He caressed the ivory keys with haunting strokes, and played like he never had before. It was said that the likes of Mozart and Chopin could not have composed a finer piece. The music that was emanating from the piano that night was haunting, and some of the most beautiful the people in attendance had ever heard. Once he was done, the people clapped and cheered. Leopold then rose from his seat and bowed once more. He then turned to his parents. He grinned at them and bowed. They were smiling and clapping, very proud of their son, I'm sure. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, without notice or warning, they both collapsed, dead, on the ballroom floor. The doctors in attendance rushed to their side to try and give aid, but it was too late. Instantly they died, with no cause and no reason. The community was saddened to lose two of its most influential members, but they were very excited to celebrate their son. word of his talent began to spread far and wide, and he was asked to perform at all of the finest get-togethers all throughout the South. The finest families welcomed him back to perform his haunting waltz, and perform he did. He played beautifully every time. However, at the end of every performance, after he had bowed to the owners of the house to show his appreciation, they keeled over dead without warning, clapping and smiling one moment, then dead the next. People were becoming frightened and came to the realization of the only common trace linking these tragic incidents, and it was Leopold and his deadly waltz. Some of the finest people in the community were taken after hearing the haunted melody, including his own parents, and the remaining members of Savannah's high society did not want to risk the chance of being next. Watch out for Leopold's grin and his waltz of the dead, the people would warn. It became bedtime ghost stories told to the children, warning them to be wary of the man in black playing his haunted piano. Leopold was once again shunned, and he was banished from the community. Rumors began to spread, asking and wondering how a mostly inept artist all of a sudden create a musical piece of art and could play beautifully seemingly overnight. They claim he sold his soul to the devil in exchange for his talents. The other rumor was he was gifted his talent from the devil so he could claim the souls of the people he played for. Leopold was called the devil's composer and death's musician after the tragic events. He could be heard afterwards in his seclusion, playing his waltz all through the night, frightening whoever would pass. So no matter what you believe, whichever the rumor, if the man in black asked to play at your catered affair, politely turn him away, for you may be next to join the waltz of the dead. Disappearances of the night. The moment everything changed was when people started to disappear. It might have seemed commonplace back then because many people went missing every year, but we should have been worried. Those missing were small children, not teenagers, but children between the ages of 5 to 7. It started like a small line. Children went missing from their homes in Georgia. The police were confused at this string of unexplained disappearances. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of violence. The parents didn't even hear any sound coming from the missing child's room. It was like they had just vanished into thin air. The government got involved, trying to cover it up. News was suppressed, documents classified, the whole bomb explosion. People started to move on not long after, although the parents were still devastated. Soon, the disappearances occurred in other states. It was like a giant wave that rolled over the nation, children going missing in the dead of night. Parents were becoming devastated in an ever-increasing number. The number rose up to 700, and in a few months, it rose to 2 million. It swept across the nation like a storm, causing mass panic and fear in the public. The government did what it had to do to calm them down, including violence. It seemed like the United States was the only victim of the unknown attacker. But soon, it swept over the earth. Nations overseas reported ever-increasing disappearances of children. Asia, the UK, Japan, all fell into chaos. Churches deemed it a sign of the apocalypse, and millions of parents fled to churches for salvation. The number of children was dropping. People were rioting. Blood was spilled. Fires were set. Death rained down on the adults of the world like falling rocks. Soon, the world began to collapse. And soon, there were reports of teens disappearing in the dead of night, too. My first story of Brook Run Insane Asylum. Brook Run Mental Hospital was a state-operated institution located in Dunwoody, Georgia. In 1998, it closed its doors due to many accusations of patient abuse and general negligence, coupled with a new law that privatized all mental health institutions in the state. Brook Run opened its doors one final time and released the pressure on the insanity valves. Hundreds of mentally ill patients were left to rot on the streets of Atlanta, at least the ones who could walk. There were several confirmed reports of former patients being left behind for several days after the hospital officially closed. Though none of them died, they were found when the building was being cleaned out by employees of the state. They were covered in unexplained bruises and burns. However, several people did die in this building throughout the years, and some claimed to see their ghosts for many years after. Not too long prior to being closed down, a fence was put around the decently sized complex, and it was near impossible to enter without a pair of bolt cutters or an affinity to scratches caused by climbing barbed-wired fences. The reason for the intense security measures was due to the fact that the SWAT team began using the infamous D building in the back of the complex to practice raids. At night, one could hear the faint sound of pops from gunshots in the nearby suburbs that emanated from Brook Run. After a good year or two, the fences were rife with holes, cut by a variety of local teens looking to engage in a myriad of activities. Some went to make out and finger blast their high school sweetheart. Some went with their cameras and crowbars for that adrenaline rush. And those members of the social pariah went to practice demonic worship and witchcraft. The first story I heard about Brook Run was when I was around 12 years old and the place was still heavily under lock and key. My sister's then boyfriend had broken in and told me about a building that was a tall tower with 3 stories to it. As it turned out, it had 3 stories that went straight down into the ground to high-security confinement spaces for the criminally insane. Upon reaching the bottom floor, he found a small room surrounded by locked doors, and right in the middle of it was a giant pallet of purple Gatorade. Some years later, Brook Run became the place that I frequented. The fences were all torn down. The SWAT force gave up trying to keep kids out and moved training locations. Too many worries of lawsuits if some dumb kid wound up getting blown away. A dog park was put somewhere in the midst of the old asylum, and one could go as far back as the D building, which was off limits to the public, no less. History would repeat itself, though, and within no time. Teenagers had cut through the fences and sneaked into the massive D building. They'd kept the place in relatively good shape, considering they were teenagers, built a skate park, and even took the time to use a saw to grind out all the rebar stumps that made it impossible to skate safely. When I wasn't frequenting the D building, I would walk around the park, looking at all the mold-covered, rotting stone benches, representative of pagan altars, the old bathrooms that had been boarded up, and the seemingly pointless former administration buildings. Brook Run has now been turned into Leanne Leviton Park at Brook Run, and the old D building was torn down. It really was extremely sad to see it go, and I did actually cry when I came back from military school, ecstatic to see the place. I'd met so many weird friends, and find a bulldozer plowing through the cafeteria. But for those who loved it, it will always be Brook Run, and we will always brag about being the last to visit its eerie confines and haunting scenery. I have many more stories to share about it, all of them creepy and terrifying, unexplainable and odd. I broke into Central State Hospital, and what I found is horrifying. I decided it would be fun to start a YouTube channel, mainly making videos on abandoned buildings. I live south of Georgia and was wondering, besides the haunted town of Savannah, is there any other abandoned or haunted locations? What I found is called the Central State Hospital, an asylum. This is Georgia's first insane asylum. So on July 15th, 2019, I woke up early in the morning and began my 2-hour drive. I live near the city, so it was odd for me to once see building after building turn into nothing but trees, which was nice for once. So after a long ride, I've arrived at my destination, ready for my first video. It was very empty, but everything was bright. For example, it was a nice sunny day, and the wind was blowing through the trees. The grass seemed freshly cut, and staring at the big building, which I can assume is the main building of the asylum, I felt more at peace than an eerie feeling. I got my equipment ready, strapping my GoPro camera to my baseball cap and putting on my bag with other materials, and began my walk around the premises, exploring the exterior of the main building. First thing I noticed was a large water fountain. It still worked, but besides that, the building was, of course, old, and vines were growing, covering the walls. Mother Nature was taking back what was rightfully hers. I approached the front door of the main building, and of course, it was locked with a sign warning to not enter the building due to its decay and mold, and dangerous animals like snakes, etc. But a locked door and a sign wasn't going to stop me from entering, because of course, all I came here to do was go inside and explore the depths and shed light on something that is forgotten. I checked and checked, but all the doors were locked. But I was surprised to the lack of broken windows and vandalism on this structure. I never minded spray painting and sorts, but for once it was nice seeing its true beauty with no help from the so-called artist. When I walked around back, there was a set of stairs. I went up and found a path that leads inside the building, but of course the damn doors were locked again. But this time, the glass on the door was broken, and I could see through. But to my amazement, the lights were still on, which is odd for an abandoned building that is no longer in use. I reached through the broken glass, trying to unlock the door from the other side, but no luck, due to it needing a key instead of a twist lock. Looking through that window one last time, seeing the filthy broken down state of its interior, and what I can assume is a walk-through metal detector, I ventured my way back downstairs to be greeted with a security car pulling up to my side. the window rolling down with a man in the driver's seat. "You're not breaking into this building, are you?" the driver asked. "No, of course not. All the doors are locked," I sarcastically answered. The man in the driver's seat asked for my ID, which I was happy to oblige. He ran a quick background check and spoke through his walkie-talkie, telling whoever was on the other side of my existence. He then asked, "What's the purpose of your visit?" "I heard about this place online, so I came to make a video," I replied once more. He then went on to explain why I can't enter the facility and warns me of the mold and animals which lie inside, and that I wasn't allowed to be behind the building, but for me to stay at the front and observe from the sidewalk. He gave me back my ID, and I thanked him for the warning and made my way back to the front as he drove off behind me. I'm not giving up on this exploration so easily, I thought to myself. This place has tones of the building which need someone or something to explore every crevice of its interior. I need it inside, and I am not going to stand by the sidewalk or go home wasting a 2-hour drive, wasting gas and my days off from work, just because of a few locked doors, a sign, and a lonely security guard. I looked and checked my surroundings for any witnesses and made my way to the next building, which was connected to the main building. When I got there, I was blessed seeing another set of stairs. When I got up there was another locked door, but next to the door was a full-size window, which was broken, that I may be able to fit through. I looked through the window to see nothing but darkness. I got a flashlight out of my bag, turning it on and shining it inside. It was an empty room, but 2 sets of doors on the left side. One set was a double-sided door, with what I can see clearly is a chain around it, and the next door over was also doubled, but no doors to be seen. I assumed it leads into a hallway. Making sure I wasn't going to cut myself on the glass, I made my way inside the building. Finally, my exploration begins. When I shine the light on the walls, now, there is vandalism. Spray paintings on the wall, the same old dick drawings and slurs sprayed upon the walls of this decaying building. I then walked into the open doorway to see a hallway leading to the front of the building. When I got to the entrance, the front door was chained shut, and behind me to the right of the hallway is an elevator, which looked crooked, and of course more paintings inside. There is no way in hell I'm stepping 1 foot in that elevator. There was also a room to the right of that front door, which what I believed is called a check-in center, and entered the room, seeing a fallen filing cabinet with papers scattered on the floor. I picked up some of the papers and read them. Most were just pay slips and blood donations, until I came across the accidents reports. In the 1950s, 3 patients died nearby after escaping. Another hanged himself with a bedsheet. 1 patient beat another to death. And when a patient in the maximum security unit vomited on the floor, 2 employees ordered him to clean up the mess with a towel and then forced him to eat the towel. The patient choked to death. Nurses performed major surgery without a doctor's supervision, and that a physician moonlighting from a pharmaceutical company used experimental drugs on patients without their consent. And more fucked up shit like that. I then came across a photo showing men in suits staring at a little boy, 5 or 6, who was locked inside a small metal cage. The boy stares into the middle distance, avoiding eye contact with the men on the other side of the bars, or with the camera. What the hell were they doing to these people? I then heard a noise coming from outside the room. It sounded like a scruffing sound. I peeked out the doorway to see nothing. I heard it again this time, from the elevator. I slowly made my way to the elevator with my flashlight and quickly shined it inside. A possum hissed and jumped out of the elevator and crawled away, making that noise, running down the hallway to the right of the elevator. I screamed and kept my flashlight on the possum, watching it go away. Then I saw something I'll never forget. Someone or something jumped out of one of the doorways in that hallway, attacking the possum and eating it alive. I can hear the possum's shrieks of pain before giving in. I kept my light on the figure and watched as it stood up slowly, looking at me. Its eyes were glowing. The being was completely black. I heard as it struggled to breathe like a smoker with a hole in their neck as it spoke. "Is it someone new?" It spoke, struggling to speak, tilting its head left to right, studying me. I froze in fright, horrified of what I'm seeing, and then another one pops out of the wall. How the hell is it doing that? Sitting on the wall, not struggling. And then another one pops up, this time on the wall across from the second beam. Jesus Christ! They're coming out of the goddamn walls! Then one by one more appear from the ceiling, and now from the floor, all of them staring at me with their eyes glowing. I was still frozen, staring back at them, until they all started sprinting and crawling rapidly towards me. This broke me out of my trance. I ran back down the hallway where I came from. I can hear them all shrieking and yelling, hearing their smoker inhales and exhales. I run as fast as I can. I see the window and the light shining through it. I must make it! I screamed in my head. I must survive! I crawled my way out of there as fast as I could. I made it out, but I didn't stop there. I still ran and ran until I got to my car. I started it, and as I backed out, I saw them all of them looking out the windows, staring at me. Now I'm warning you, don't go to Central State Hospital. Not because of the mold or the animals, but because the patients never left, and they want out. From the wombs. On the morning of May 29th, 2019, 271 pregnant women woke up to find their unborn children missing. The phenomena was reported across the United States, with the highest percent of victims residing in Nevada and Florida. As soon as the victims discovered the absence of their children, they were immediately admitted to hospitals and other health facilities. Examinations of the affected resulted in several unusual findings. First, there were no marks or incisions. Secondly, few of the affected suffered from blisters around their pelvic and uterine areas, consistent with the effects of radioactive exposure. However, they did not display any signs of radiation poisoning. They claimed to have felt no pain during the previous night. They had been asleep when the disappearances occurred and did not remember anything unusual. Scientists could not explain how this happened, and the victims and their families were left to grieve. On September 1st, 2019, reports began flooding in from the small town of Lula, Georgia, about unusual weather patterns. A thunderstorm had formed over the area, but the expected rainfall did not consist of water. Rather, local residents claimed that red flakes were falling from the sky. Upon testing, the flakes were identified as being of biological origin. They were pieces of fetal tissue. I think I had some sort of devil in the back of my ambulance. I'm an advanced EMT in the great state of Georgia. The service I work for has a lot of non-emergency transports. Essentially, that means one of a few things. Number one, Granny is being discharged from the hospital and needs a ride to the nursing home. Number two, some homeless bum was looking for a soft bed and a hot meal. He went for medical clearance and now is going to a psychiatric facility for a week. Number three, we sometimes get genuine wackos that really need to be in psych facilities. These are referred to as 1013s. My partner is a paramedic. We will call her Wendy. She's older. She's done this for a long time and seen a lot of shit. That's important. Remember that. Anyways, we got your typical 1013 out-of-town transport at 21:30. 5-hour trip puts us home at 2:30-ish. Hooray. Most of the time they are fairly calm and have no problems. This time was different. We arrived to pick up a 24-year-old female patient for alleged suicidal ideations. Among other things, this chick was genuinely effed up, and when I first saw her, I was immediately on edge. Something was off. We get our report and paperwork from the nurse and escort the patient to the ambulance. We will call her Linda. As a medic, Wendy rode in the back with the patient, and I drove the 2.5 hours to South Georgia. At first, it was uneventful. Then all the radio stations started going out. Odd, but we were driving through rural Georgia. Not unheard of. Next, my handheld went all kinds of weird. Feedback, volume of incoming radio traffic, drastically fluctuating. You name it. Still, I thought nothing of it. Then I heard what sounded like a whisper. "Wendy, you need something?" No response. Old woman probably didn't hear. I repeat my question, but louder. "No, I didn't say nothing, baby," she responded back. Then Linda started to cackle. I'm not a guy prone to silly fears, but I gripped the wheel and gritted my teeth in a sudden feeling of trepidation. The cackling got louder and louder. Wendy was shouting over her to calm down, or she was pulling out Versed, a tranquilizer. She quieted down. Then I heard the whisper again. It was Linda. She was getting louder. She was chanting in some language I've never heard. I can't describe it other than to say that it damn sure didn't sound human. I found myself driving a bit faster. At this point, I was well past creeped out. That's when Linda decided to turn it up to 10. "I'm not going to Thomasville. They can't make us. We will punish them. All of them. Yes. What do you think, Wendy? Shall we punish them?" Wendy was telling her to shut it, or she would get the Versed. "I swear to God, girl, I'll do it." At this point, she just grinned, but at least she shut up. We were almost to the psych ward, another 5 minutes. We arrived and I let loose a breath I'd been holding for some time. We walk her to the front door and buzz the nurses. Linda is chuckling now. I'm willing the nurses to hurry. Finally, they arrive. They take us and Linda up to the 3rd floor, the top floor. We take care of paperwork, etc. Linda walks up to Wendy. She whispered something in her ear. Wendy stiffens up and turns 2 shades lighter. Linda started laughing and walked away with the nurse. Come on, Wendy. Let's head home. Yeah, baby, let's go. I can tell she's bothered. I wait to ask why. We get to the bottom floor and open the door. We hear a shriek of laughter and a scream of fear. Linda lands 3 feet in front of me. The crazy bitch must have jumped. She landed on her head with a sickening sound. A wet slap like dropping a pound of burger patty. A crack as most of her bones broke upon impact. A thud. Her head is completely caved in above the nose. That's not the worst part, though. As I foolishly run to see if she has a pulse, instinctual reaction, I get a chill. She's smiling in death. Wendy is screaming. Nurses are pouring out of the establishment calling 911. She's dead. We finally pack up and head off. Wendy is driving home. She hasn't said a word since Linda jumped. She's pale and shaking and crying. She's pulled dead babies out of cars, watched as entire families lay dead and dying after being assaulted, and this crazy woman's death shook her up like this? Sweetie, she says, have you ever wondered what would happen if we crashed head-on with an 18-wheeler? Then she cackled, just like Linda. I stole a glance at her eyes. She has the same look that Linda did. She seems crazed. We are still an hour from home. What do I do? Update. When I left work, Wendy had to go to the ER for back pain. That's the last I saw of her. I'm going in today for another 24-hour shift, and will inform you guys if there's anything afoot. Airborne. It started with a sniffle. Just as he was passing Georgia I-20, exit 99, Kiefer McKeeby, that two-timing disloyal, traitorous man-whore and swindler extraordinaire, who according to his wrong soon-to-be ex-wife Angie, was also a grade A certified piece of shit, had hit a rather dense cloud of Georgia snow, aka pine tree pollen. Now Kiefer didn't have any allergies to speak of, understand? He'd grown up to be the rat bastard that he was while running through the local forests and fields of the Peach State, breaking hearts as the second-string quarterback of his high school football team. Therefore, when his beat-up jalopy of a pickup truck emerged from the other side of the pollen, he didn't think much of it. On the other hand, he also didn't think much of it when he was fooling around with that harlot from Macon, Joanne Montgomery. Anyway, as things went, his truck had gone maybe 3 or 4 miles past the aforementioned cloud of Georgia snow when he started sneezing. A couple miles later, there weren't just little ones, mind you. No, they were big, whopping sneezes. The kind where you have to try with all your might to keep your eyeballs from popping out of their sockets. The kind where you pray to God Almighty that you don't swerve into that 18-wheeler to the right. as you speed past at 95 miles an hour. And they kept coming, worse and worse. Soon blood and soft tissue were spouting from his nose. A tooth flew from his mouth, for some god-forsaken reason. In fact, the sneezes were so bad that Kiefer, who according to his own reckoning ain't no pussy, thought about pulling over. Only problem was that there wasn't much shoulder here on this section of the freeway. Not much of one at all. Not that he could... Wait! There's an opening, and a way which catches his eye. A split second later, the violently heaving Kiefer is attempting to dodge a pair of massive tractor trailers onto a widening shoulder, but suddenly realizes he can't take his foot off the gas pedal. As his dim brain begins to realize this precarious nature of his situation, he watches in abject horror as the speedometer ticks up the miles per hour. 95, 100, 105, 110. The truck is shaking now. Dirt spews from beneath the vehicle as he draws closer to a hump of earth that he can't see through his sneezes. Still the speed increases until he's airborne, sailing through time, space, and Georgia sunshine, rocketing right into the trunk of a massive pine tree. Miles away, heartbroken Angie cries on the shoulder of her newest best friend, her spiritual advisor and confidant, Madame Zenga, recently arrived from that great city of New Orleans, who happens to be incredibly gifted in the arts of voodoo, remote manipulation, and summoning of convenient natural contrivances like pollen clouds. In the voodoo priestess words, "Goodbye, heartbreak. Goodbye, Kiefer. And good riddance." I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.